Thank you, ladies. Thank you, love.
Okay, here we go. Hello, everybody, and thank you for your patience with us, and thank you for joining Just Talking this week. I don't know what's wrong with my live broadcast. It decided to do something a little different, but hey, that's how we learn. So this is recorded, and so thank you for your patience. So I am very excited to be here with, again, my co-host, or my partner in crime, Aisha Dami Migueda.
Hello.
And today we've got coming back to us again, thankfully, is the lovely and talented Victoria Lorient-Fabish. Yay!
Hey!
And we had a lot of feedback. I had personal feedback as well as on Facebook about that hook and how that hook visualization really works. So, and I don't know if you guys were able to get back and watch. Just Talking has the replay of that. That was a few weeks ago. And we just had really good feedback.
Awesome.
Part of the reason we're doing this is because I don't think people have conversations about this. They can have you on, for instance, Victoria, as a guest, and you'll be speaking to a specific issue instead of saying, well, hey, you know, how do you know when you need therapy? How do you know what's the difference? Like, we've talked about it a little bit over the last couple of weeks, where Aisha and myself talked about our own journeys.
Yeah.
And I know Aisha talked about the interview process, that you should interview a few people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and what I would like to get your thoughts on is the interview process. Two things. Number one, is there a place of information that you can go to see, like a bank of different kinds of therapists?
Yeah.
And let's just start with that, and we'll go from...
So, I mean, I'm a member of the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association. I'm a member of the Ontario Society of Psychotherapists. I'm a member of the Canadian Registered, the CRPO, the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario. These all have, you know, psychotherapists and counselors that are members of these associations. And it's in the public record, you know, what their, shall we say, their history, if there's any problem with them, number one. Number two, if they're a member of these associations or to college, well, to be able to conduct therapy currently in Ontario, the laws of the land are such that you need to be a member of the college. To say I conduct psychotherapy, you're going to be a member of the College of Psychotherapists. If you're a social worker, you're a member of that college. If you're a psychologist, you're a member of that college. But if you are a counselor or a psychotherapist, you need to be in other words, if you are performing psychological services for people, you need to be adhering and a member of those associations and those colleges. So that's something for someone to check into. Someone can't just say, hey, I'll be doing counseling on you, or hi, I do psycho. You can't just do that. You've got to have the accreditation. And that's an important piece for people to look at. And I was so fortunate because when I grandparented into the college, I had already had a full practice of being a holistic psychotherapist. At the time, I called myself a holistic psychotherapist. And then I realized as soon as these laws of the land started changing, that's when I decided get the master's degree, get the qualifications to be parts of these things so that, you know, I'm totally on board with everything that needs to happen, but also I wasn't going to tell them that I'm not doing holistics. If they were going to holistic work, meaning body-centered, somatic work, trauma-based, trauma work that's based in the soma versus just the talk therapy. And I was ready for them to say, sorry, you can't be part of this, but I'm very, very pleased that they were very, very welcoming of the work that I do. And so it's not just one kind of therapy in these colleges and in these, it's a wide range, thankfully. They are providing for that, and I'm very pleased. So a person doesn't just have to do only CBD, or cognitive behavioral therapy, not CBD, CBT. Don't have to only do talk therapy. There are people doing various types of psychodynamic therapy, trauma-based, somatic, emotional, etc. Emotional focused.
Mm-hmm. And that right in there is a lot of verbiage that when you're used to talking in certain circles, like that means something. Like I liked how you went back and you said the CBT is the cognitive behavioral therapy. And
right.
So Aisha, you have a question, or I don't want to just.
Yeah, actually, I did have a question. Thank you, Gwen. And thank you, Victoria. That was great that you kind of talked about things in that very broad sense. When someone is looking for therapy, now you've talked about psychologists, you've talked about psychotherapists, you've talked about social workers, there's also psychiatrists. How does one figure out who should I be going to? Because there's so much out there, right? How do they know?
Slightly different designations: psychologist, psychotherapist. Psychotherapist and counselor, generally similar. Most of them have master's degrees, or at the very least have really good training, have an undergrad degree. Psychologist has a different designation, different college, master's degree most often with the psychologist. It's so interesting. Is it different? Honestly, I don't believe it is. We're all doing psychotherapeutic work. We're all doing emotional unpacking. We're all doing brief and long-term, solution-focused and processing, developmental. I mean, everyone's basically doing that. The psychotherapist, the counselor, and the psychologist. And it's dependent on what their area of expertise is as well, because you can, whether you're a psychotherapist, a counselor, or a psychologist, the area that you also, want to be studying and want to be exposing yourself to is also, especially if you have a master's degree, also going to be partly your choice, right? I'm more of a Rogerian therapist, just to get a Rogerian is, Carl Rogers is a person-centered psychotherapist. In other words, I don't differentiate between this, like sometimes it's the therapist and the client. No, we are just people. We're team members working on you.
Nice.
We're a team
That's
working on
yeah.
you, and that's a very Rogerian thing. And Carl Rogers was very much, the Rogerian way was also, it's like sometimes, but not always, in a very discerning way, my style of therapy will reveal a little bit of my personal world, not a lot, just to be of assistance to that person, if it's helpful in a discerning way. But many therapists, that's just a no, 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 no. But not so much in the kind of therapy that I most am aligned with.
Beautiful.
Very good, yeah.
Now, a psychiatrist is a PhD. It's a study after you become a doctor. I would say that they are mostly focused in pharmaceuticals, which there is an absolutely important place for that. If someone presents as suicidal, they're beyond my scope of practice. Okay, they should be beyond most people's scope of practice. They can work as a team. You can have the psychotherapist, the counselor, the psychologist, and the psychiatrist if there's suicidal ideation. That's really massive. Hey, just something to tell everyone. Did you know that if you ask someone point blank, are you thinking of killing yourself? That will reduce the event of them actually doing it by a lot.
Really? Wow.
Like by a lot.
Good to know. Yeah.
So you could just say, are you thinking of killing yourself? If they're talking about it and you go, okay, hey, I just want to ask you, are you thinking of killing yourself? Not are you suicidal? Are you thinking of that tends to reduce the incidence of the person actually doing it, just so you know. And I think that's a really useful tip for people just generally out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. My father, there's a few dozen things that I did wrong. My father was borderline personality disorder. And one of his things was to, I'm going to kill myself when he got into his moments. Actually it's, and I do not recommend this for anybody. This is before I knew, but I would say, well, how can is this something you want to do? Like, what is it? But then again, I was also a teenager and it's like, okay, I've heard this my whole life.
Right.
What do you want me to do about it? So, but the funny thing is that I think exactly what that does is it says, I see you and I see you're in distress.
Exactly.
See that there's something that's
exactly.
Not, and I think, so while I did it in a little bit more direct way, and I would never do that with what I know now, but whatever. I was also.
No, but it is the directness though, Gwenda.
Yeah.
It's the directness that actually creates the disruption, for them. And I'm sorry you had to go through that as a teenager. That sucks, Gwenda, and that's awful.
Yeah,
and that's not your burden. That shouldn't have been your burden.
Well, no, I think that the one thing that I love about the way that you talk about your skill set is the intergenerational BS. And I think, you know, one of the challenges that we have is a lot of times, especially if your parents have mental health issues, you don't know any different. You don't know any different until you know different.
Yeah.
And so you have to also be able to come to terms with the fact that it's like, oh, am I going to end up like that? And all these other things that you know, other than the basic teenage stuff like angst and who am I trying to be in the world, I think it actually led to a place where I would actually got to the point where I would say to my parents, like, is this something that you guys chose? Or is this, you know, what made you, you? And those were powerful conversations, but not everybody can get to that place. So, which brings me to a one little specific thing, because I'm talking about the intergenerational stuff, right? I just finished this book called Complex PTSD by Pete Walker. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I absolutely am. I haven't read that book though.
Oh, I can't even tell you his description of what emotional flashbacks are and things like that. It's amazing. But one of
some great work.
Oh, it's like just even listening to this book was, you know, oh my God, that's what that is. And once you become aware, it's like what you were just saying there. Once you become aware of a certain thing, then you can do something with it, right? It's like, oh, I didn't know that that was a thing. Oh, well, now that I know it's a thing, I can do something with it. The one thing that he talked about is when you're looking for somebody, look for somebody who studies John Bradshaw. So I think that's sort of like the kind of Rogerian that you were talking about. So like coming into the John Bradshaw school or something like that, and specifically family intergenerational stuff, is there something you would tell people to look for other than the Rogerian, which I didn't know about, and that's why we're doing this show?
So no, I mean, so I would, listen, the most important thing is interview them, or the therapist, the prospective therapist, ask a couple questions. Don't interview them necessarily on the phone, because a lot of them are busy right now with pandemic. Do a couple of questions on the email. You know, are you familiar with attachment issues? Are you familiar with you know, family systems? Are you familiar, depending on what it is, are you familiar with, I like, you know, part of the work that I do is I work with codependency and also recovery from family trauma, obviously family trauma. I have a lovely penchant for people who've gone through their, like, you know, people come to me when they're really ready for a big change, but I love it when people, for example, have gone through their addictions. Not that I love it, but they've gone through their addiction issues. Then they've done their recovery. Then they're deep into their 12-step or whatever they decided is their support. And then they go, oh, okay, their sponsor says, you know, you've been clean and sober now for about 5 years and you want to go and do more. You know, you're almost like, now it's time to, you can really explore even more, because don't forget that therapy can be, you know, it's painful sometimes. It's really painful. And so it's, I call it the pain of birth. It's like, it's a rebirthing kind of experience. And people say to me, you know, why bother? Why go to the past? You know, especially in a situation where there's a couple in front of me and, you know, someone will inevitably go, well, that's the past. Why do I have to go and explore the past? And it's past and over and it's done with. And, you know, why even deal with that? I'll tell you why, because it still rules you and you're not clear as to what exactly is going on. And that which lives in your sub or unconscious controls you. And a lot of the crap that is making people do X, Y, and Z lives in their subconscious. Mm-hmm. So, and if they don't know what that's all about, if the answer is, well, what do you think that's about? And the person says, I don't know. I'm like, that's not an okay, well, it is, but that's not an answer we're going to sit at. Let's go past the I don't know. And that's why I love the holistic work that I do, because it's a lot of closed eyes work where you're journeying inside your being to understand beyond the conscious mind. You kind of go more into the subconscious mind when you incorporate breath work and mindfulness and, you know, relaxation, music and visualization. I mean, these are the things we do in pandemic remotely. A lot of, you know, visualization, a lot of breath work, and then the body and the mind start to relax, and then we can go deeper into some of the more subconscious stuff. And I just hope that therapists that people are interviewing have some knowledge beyond just the talking head.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know that that works to really change things necessarily. I think you got to get the body in. I think you've got to get a little movement in. You got to get visualization in to really start to shift it beyond the conscious talking head.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Aisha?
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to say, I think that really it's a question of accessibility and for people to really understand what works for them and what doesn't work for them.
Oh.
And so in our last week's episode where I talked about my journey, I talked about how, you know, over the years I went through a lot of therapy and I went with a lot of therapists. And there were some points where I really wished that I was working with someone who actually understood my culture, who understood where I was coming from, who understood kind of the background that I was dealing with, right? Mm-hmm. Because some of what they said resonated with my Western side, but some of it didn't sit well with my Eastern side. And I couldn't really reconcile that. And I also didn't know how to ask for that. So how do we, those of us who want that and who want that accessibility to a counselor that really understands us and gives us that space to deal with the dual sides of our backgrounds.
But that comes in the interview process, I think. You're looking at, you know, people, there are psychotherapists and counselors out there, psychologists, that are from the cultures, and the religions, and you know what I mean? And that becomes like a touch point where we're on this sort of same page. I mean, it is important, I think, for people to be able to work with someone who can understand whether it's not their very culture, but a similar culture, because not all culture, like, you know, there's, you know, the Latin culture, the Jewish culture, the Asian, you know, it doesn't have to be you want to work with, because you're from India, you want to work with an Indian counselor, but at least someone that understands beyond white Anglo-Saxon.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
100%, yeah, absolutely. What questions do you recommend people asking around that to get a sense of what space there is to
start with? I'm a such and such person, you know, mm-hmm. and I have an upbringing that was very such and such, and really was, you know, from the immigrant's perspective, or from what's your experience around that? Have you worked with people that way? Do you yourself come from that kind of thing? That's what I would say. And people have said that to me, you know, and I say, look, I'm not Asian, but I do understand about pressure from high expectational parents on their kids, which is very much a thing that occurs in Asian culture, occurs in, you know, Jewish culture, occurs in Italian culture. And it's like, it's just, you know, understanding and empathizing on that human level. You don't have to be born in the same country, but do you get that? Do you understand that kind of bullshit that the family is lording upon us? And then, you know, then there's the other side of it. It's like, you know, do you understand? Like I'm always amazed. When I get someone inquiring to work with me, because I'm very transparent about the kind of work I do. I'm a holistic psychotherapist. I incorporate body-centered, energetic, like, so I'm like kind of a bit sort of not traditional in the work that I do, but my bells and whistles are traditional. My education is traditional and all of those things. So I bring that to the table. But I'm always amazed when a very conservative person, a very religious conservative person, wants to work with me. And I always have to go ask them, what drew you to me? Like, why me? In many ways, because they say who they are in their explanation, which I think is part of an important aspect. I'm a such and such person dealing with such and such things. And I, and then I, we engage, and I'm like, I'm just so curious as to what, and often it's people saying, well, where I've come from caused a lot of issues and a lot of pain, and I want to explore something different. And then what we inevitably find out, though, ladies, is that we're all just human, whatever it is, we're all just human, religion, color, background, immigrant, not immigrant, we're human, Now, I want to say, having said that, very, very, very clearly, that as a white woman, blonde hair, blue eye, I'm not the person who experienced what a person of color walking into a store has experienced. So I never, BS about that. We've experienced different experiences, but on the pain level, the experiences might have been different, but the pain is still the human pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. It makes sense. I think, I'm reminded of a friend of mine who shared with me a story about her experience with a therapist, where she talked about some family dynamics that were consistently racialized and racist, and that were very difficult for her to deal with.
Right.
And so she spoke about them. She called a little meeting. She talked to people about it. They were very defensive, and she was telling her therapist, and her therapist said, well, it's not your place to tell people how to behave. And so that was an instance where the therapist didn't have that kind of, understanding of what somebody, exactly what you were talking about, what that experience is like for people. And that was very jarring for her. And even though she had worked with that therapist for quite a while, that was something that actually broke their relationship, because because that showed her that this therapist didn't really understand where she was coming from. So
that's an important, we don't want to re-traumatize people, like exactly. that's a re-traumatization,
Yeah.
And that's something to be conscious of. And that is something to say, this is important to me, that you have a knowledge and a skill set around some of this stuff as well. I think that's an important thing. And also the other thing that I think is important for people many people have trouble with the silent, many people, let me be clear, have trouble with the non-human type therapist, meaning kind of overly professional. Now, very important to be professional. Let me be very clear. It's very important to be professional. But professional doesn't mean cold. Professional doesn't mean human. I like a therapist that's human, that we can talk on that human level, so that there is this essential experience that we're just two people. Mm-hmm. And, you just happen to have, this is what I say, I just happen to have a lantern in my hand. Nice. And we're all in a cave together, and I'm just a couple of steps ahead, and we're in this thing together.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Like I'm just lighting the way for us both, And so that's not me over here on some effing platform and you're down there. No, we're just in this thing together. And I think that's an important thing, because I remember seeing a therapist in my 20s. He was a good guy, but he definitely felt like he was more powerful than me. And I remember thinking, and I saw him because that was all that was available at the time. I remember thinking that's what it was. And it was a group therapy experience as well as a one-on-one. And it was great for the group therapy. I loved the group experience. But he was just a little too not warm. And you don't want to be gushy or mushy, but warm and human is what I think the thing is, the priority is.
I love that.
I love that. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Too. No, I was just going to say, I love all of that, because basically what you're talking about is people having agency and seeing each other as equals, right? And I think that that's really important for people who are just beginning the therapeutic journey, or just, in the beginning phases of it, to really understand that they have choices about what kind of therapy they want to get, and that they're able to find someone that treats them like an equal, rather than having that kind of disproportionate power relationship with their therapist, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is you don't, it's this fine balance. Is the therapist going to call you out on a few things as well, but without being judgmental?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
You know, call you out without shaming you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I've heard of those things too, you know, and it's not that people, you know, therapists they're human. They're not, no one's perfect, but there has to be sort of a minimum amount of work that they've done on themselves. That's the other thing. I really believe in therapists doing work, that they only are going to be a good therapist really if they do work on themselves. You can only take people as far as you yourself are willing to go.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I know that in my past, I had this person that I came to in crisis, and we'd been doing a lot of work. And then one day she goes, well, sometimes life isn't fair. And at that point, it's like, man, when did I ever even use that kind of language? And that broke that, because it's like, no, man, I need you to provide that lantern. I loved that visual, Victoria. Again, I just love the way that you express everything. Because I find in my situation when I was coming to it, I didn't know where all the boogeymen were. In fact, I didn't know where any of them were. So I'm not coming here to just regurgitate my life story as I can tell it. I need you to have that lantern. So this leads, because one of the things that Aisha and myself have talked about over the last couple of weeks is sometimes we go to a therapist and it's sort of, I'm having trouble with X. How can we do that? Is there a way or a path where you can go to somebody and say, I need you to drive the car. I need you to tell me what you see, like almost like an exploration. Is that something that you would advise, or is it just an assessment where you go and you do the full-on psychiatric assessment, or is there so what's in the middle of that where
psychotherapists don't do that necessarily. Psychologists more often. There is a difference. Psychologists will do some of the diagnostician stuff, right? So psychotherapist is more not that. It's more, well, here's the thing about that. I always say to my clients, they're in charge of the content, you know, they're in charge of the content. I'm not in charge of a whole lot other than my boundaries of time and payment and these type of things, but they're in charge of the content. And then I believe my job is to be like a fishing expedition team member, like that we're looking, is it possible this, is it possible that? And also, what's that feel like, that kind of thing. But I think, you know, here's the thing. Therapy is not for those who need it. It's for those who want it. And if you want it, then you need to lead the journey. You know, it can't be the therapist leading the journey. I often will say, if someone sits there waiting for me to, you know, just, you know, tell them stuff and have me, I'll ask questions initially, but the client wants to be leading that journey because they are the stakes are in their life. It's high stakes in their life. So I want them to lead, and I will be always empowering them for that. You know?
Yeah.
And it's not, you know, the other thing is it's so important in the therapeutic relationship where you're not creating a dependence on that therapist, even though initially that is part of it. Sometimes you're just like, when you're in the trenches, you got to kind of really kind of depend on someone initially. But then I think, like, good parents, not the therapist is the parent, but good parents, I believe, empower their kids to fly free and to be independent. Good therapists empower their clients to be choosing for themselves, deciding, you know, all that, and being as independent as possible and figuring it out on their own. And, you know, we're not the key after a while.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Does that help?
Well, I mean, I think in my, you know, again, in my experience, the first time I went to somebody and I gave like a Cole's Notes version of my life, they're like, oh my God, are you okay? And it's, no, I'm not okay. I'm really angry. I'm this. And if you can't handle the truth, but it's, you know, that was sort of like.
For the client. That's right. You don't want to, I find myself, exactly that, Gwenda. I have found myself holding the space for the therapist, because they couldn't handle what was coming at them from me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you want a therapist that can freaking be strong and
Exactly.
see you and not think you're looking at you like you've got three heads, as if that's the worst shit that they've ever heard. No, this is bad, but it's not the worst shit I've ever heard. You're just, it's normal. You're normal.
Well, exactly. And I think it's the flinch thing. And I mean, the thing
flinch.
I offer, and I think Aisha, again, and as you said, Victoria, I think it's really important if that therapist hasn't gone through their own stuff,
that's right.
Then you can be triggering a whole bunch of things that are under rocks in them. And it's like, I mean, I'm very much practical. You're a little fire baby too, right? It's like, yeah, no, like you, like I am on a mission now. I know something's in there. I need you to find, like, help me find it, because if I could find it, I would do it on my own. So
Yeah.
I just look at myself, that, you know, that 26-year-old woman, that was my first, well, it wasn't my first time, but it was like if you can't help me, does this mean I'm on my own? And I did pretty okay on my own, but you get to a certain place where it's like, oh, like now when I read books, it's like, oh, that's what that is. So it's sort of ass backwards. So, I mean, I guess that's the thing, is like, how do we look at therapy? When do we go for therapy? Is it because we're having trouble?
Okay, so that's a great question. I think, okay, I love that question actually, because people sometimes say, well, I don't really have anything I'm not in crisis right now. So, you know, they'll have seen me for a while after gone through some stuff, and then we go through a plateau. And here's what I say to people, you know, the best therapy is actually served out of crisis, because the kind of therapy you do in crisis is all about, you know, breathe, solution, get you out of the crisis. There's not a lot of developmental exploration. And the best stuff occurs when you're not in crisis. I love people that are interested in a process of, let's start to really unpack, because we're not in crisis. And we can look at relational details, and we can look at patterns, and we can look at, you know, family dynamics. We can look at all these things that when you're in a crisis, you're not looking at that at all, you know, not at all, right? So best therapy served. And I'm more of a developmental therapist, where we're looking at all aspects. We're not like focus, you know, an EPA therapist, like breathe, get you out of crisis, that kind of thing, you know. EAP, not EPA. EAP.
And that's who it was. Yeah. This poor woman was like, you know, oh, I want to help people. It's like, no, man, this is like, you got to be able to step up. But I think that, yeah, so I don't want to take over the whole conversation, because I just know that there's people like me out there that they don't even know where to start sometimes, right? So I think that even this conversation has been fabulous in like giving a whole bunch more. If I knew a quarter of this when I was 26, life would be so much better. Aisha, any last questions, comments, queries?
Yeah, I did. I had one question, Victoria, and that is, when it comes to dealing with trauma, when people have experienced trauma and they're doing their best to deal with it as they can, is it necessary for them to go back and go through the trauma to get through therapy? Because I've had people ask me this, even as a coach, when I say, well, this isn't my forte, you should probably talk to someone. And then they say, well, how far back do I need to go? Do I need to go back to, and for me, I say, well, you can talk to your therapist, but I don't think that you need to relive everything to be able to go through it. So I just wanted to get your feedback on that, make sure I'm telling my clients the right thing.
Well, here's the thing. There is a school of thinking that would say, yes, you need to go there, you need to relive it. And I'm very wary of that, because you better be a trauma specialist if you're taking people through that, because you better know what you're doing, and you better know how to do it, or you're just going to make it worse. And a lot of therapists do. They have no clue how to deal with a healing crisis when a client is going back into their trauma. So, you know, slow is your friend, fast is your enemy when it comes to trauma exploration. And I have a lot of study in trauma. So And I do it a lot somatically, because I find that people, when they do it through the body, they don't necessarily need to do it through the mind, through the emotions. And so through cranial, I mean, we're not touching bodies now these days, but and even when I don't do cranial touch body, but I do energetic, it's called somatic emotion, but very, very, very slow work. I don't know if you know Peter Levine work, but he's my guru when it comes to, this is who I studied with, and I studied with a lot of the Peter Levine way of doing trauma therapy, which is very at the edge, just at the edge and back off, and just at the edge and back off. And not a lot of therapists have that knowledge, and they mess up and they go too fast. And they go way too fast into, they go to the center of it, and then what do they find themselves in? Full crisis. So never go to the, so asking, what's your experience in trauma work? You know, do you have trauma training? You know, and that's an important thing. So no, Aisha, I don't believe they need to. I believe at some point they do, with a trained person that knows how to slow the process, titrate, that lovely chemistry term, one drop at a time, titrate, back off, titrate. It's very important. Or re-traumatization is like, especially sexual trauma and you know, physical traumas, childhood traumas.
Yeah.
Calmly going through that without any, like, they need to be trained for that.
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you so much for that. That's great. Yeah, you've given us so much today, Victoria. It's been great having you and having you to give us all this information. Thank you.
I'm happy I was able to help.
Of course. Gwen, anything you want to add?
That was, I mean, Victoria, I love it. And I'm trying to keep cognizant of the time, and technical difficulties aside, I really appreciate your insight. I think that we've given people some good stuff to chew on, and, you know, go Oscars. And
the main thing is, if you're, you know, people, you know, therapists are really busy right now, but that doesn't mean you don't get on a waiting list, because cancellations come up.
Yeah.
And keep reaching out, keep using your insurance, keep, you know, spend money not on shoes, because we're not going to parties too much. So spend it on therapy. Don't do it alone. Oh, and the other thing is, if you can't afford a therapist, or you don't have insurance or anything like that, there are lots of free 12-step groups that have nothing to do with alcohol, that have to do with dysfunctional families, that have to do with codependency, that have to do with, you know, other things. So, and they're free, and you have fellow travelers and you have sponsors. That's a very valid system as well, in the case of someone who doesn't have the finances for it, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, I can't recommend this for anybody that had childhood stuff. This Complex PTSD by Pete Walker.
Oh, read your books. Exactly.
Opened my mind and gave clarity to a lot of feelings or actions or triggers. I call them bounces, because you go down, you always come back up, right?
Right,
so,
right.
At least that's the way I choose to look at it.
Right.
So thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
This is more than anything I could have dreamed of. And maybe we'll get you on another night. Maybe we'll film it in advance, and we never know where this is going to go. But I really appreciate it. And again, we've put Victoria's information. There's one post that has her website, because she has a wonderful resources on her website, online courses. And I mean, you all see, she's fabulous, right? And
Thanks, Gwenda. I so appreciate it. Great to see you both, Aisha and Gwenda. You're great ladies doing great work. And thank goodness for you.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria. It's been great having you both months. All the information that you've shared, all the love and light that you bring to it. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you, Gwen, as always, creating the space for us to have these conversations. So thank you.
That's right.
Okay, ladies, have a great week. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.